How do you catch an anonymous killer when they are a certified genius capable of building untraceable bombs? Bombs that they dispatch to random targets, leaving only false clues to throw you off their scent. The search for the serial killer, dubbed the Unabomber by the FBI, was one of the longest and most costly manhunts in American history. The Unabomber's campaign of terror consisted of 16 bombs in total. He would either deliver these mail bombs himself or send them via postal service. His targets were people he claimed were destroying the natural environment and advancing modern technologies. From 1978 until authorities arrested him in 1996, the Unabomber murdered 3 people and left 23 others injured. Was he a revolutionary, or was his ideology a facade to cover up his desire to kill? This is the portrait of Ted Kaczynski, also known as the Unabomber. Welcome to Portrait of a Serial Killer. Before I continue, I want to give you a quick disclaimer. In this episode, I'll be discussing the following: murder, acts of terrorism, bombing, and mental health. I won't go into all the gory details, but it could still be upsetting for some people. Please keep yourself safe and click out the video if necessary. I hope I see you in the next one. Okay, let's begin. Theodore John Kacynski was born in Chicago on May 22, 1942, to Polish-American parents Wanda and Theodore Kacynski. 7 years later, the couple had a second son, David, who was born on October 3, 1949. They were a working-class family, but Kacynski's parents lived a frugal lifestyle and were able to save and invest money successfully. As a result, they could provide some financial support to their sons during their adult life. Kacynski would exploit this support by lying about needing money for medical bills, but instead using the money to fund his bombing campaign. Kacynski's mother, Wanda, described him as a laughing and active baby until at 9 months old, when a hive-like rash appeared over his body, he was required to stay quarantined in hospital. Kacynski's parents could only visit their son twice weekly for 2 hours. Following his release from hospital, Kacynski's parents noted a significant change in their son, who appeared to have shut down. He no longer made eye contact or smiled. It took weeks for his parents to repair their relationship with their son, and he eventually began to make some eye contact with them. Wanda believed this event had a significant impact on his son's social development and ability to form healthy attachments. She would later tell her younger son, David, about this event and insist, "You don't ever abandon your brother, David, because that's what he fears the most." Aside from this incident, Kacynski's formative years seem fairly normal. He described his childhood in the inner city of Chicago positively, and his elementary school described him as healthy and well-adjusted. When Kacynski was 10, his family moved into a house in the suburb of Evergreen Park in Illinois. Kacynski's brother David, who was 3 when the family moved, recalls warm and positive memories of his childhood with his father taking him and his older brother on hikes and camping trips. Both brothers developed an affinity with nature that David attributed to their father and the time that they spent in the wilderness together. Initially, Kacynski seems to thrive at Evergreen Park Community High School, but things change quickly for Kacynski as his high level of intelligence becomes more apparent. In 5th grade, Kacynski scored 167 on an IQ test. To be considered a genius, you would need to score 140 or more. Kacynski's score placed him in the same IQ range as theoretical physicists Stephen Hawking and Albert Einstein. As a result, the school advised Kacynski's parents to have their son skip an academic year and move straight to 7th grade. This had a positive effect on his academic attainment. Unfortunately, it harmed his social circle and stunted his social development skills. He was now in a class with pupils he didn't know who were older and bigger than him. It isolated him from his friends who remained in 5th grade, but made it difficult for him to make new friends in 7th grade. Kacynski would later criticize his parents' decision to move him forward in school because of the social difficulties he faced as a result. A high school friend of Kacynski's explained how he was never really seen as a person, as an individual personality. He was always regarded as a walking brain. During this time, Kacynski discovered his love of mathematics, spending hours studying and solving advanced problems. In an FBI interview, Wanda stated that her son was a precocious child, a voracious reader who sometimes slipped in and out of his own world. She explained how he would often stay in his attic bedroom with little interaction with the family and appeared to be in trance-like states where he would completely shut others out. Kacynski was not wholly isolated during his time in high school. He joined various clubs. maths, German, and biology. He even played trombone in the school's marching band. He began to socialise with a group of bright boys known as the Briefcase Boys, because they all carried briefcases, who shared his interest in science and maths. Even so, Kacynski's brother remembers that friends rarely came to the house for his older brother, and most of the time he would remain in his attic bedroom when not in school or doing extracurricular activities. Kacynski would end up skipping 11th grade, instead attending a summer school and graduating at 15. He was encouraged to apply to Harvard. He was successful and entered university on a scholarship in 1958 at the age of 16. When reflecting on this point in his life, Kacynski stated, "By the time I left high school, I was definitely regarded as a freak by a large segment of the school body." And he identified that he'd begun to feel a growing hostility towards his peers because of the way they viewed him and treated him. At Harvard, Kacynski studied mathematics and earned his Bachelor of Arts degree in 1962. During his first year, he was placed at 8 Prescott Street, which was a 3-story Victorian house smaller than most halls of residence. It had been decided that this residence would be used specifically for the less mature boys who needed a more nurturing environment. Unfortunately, this had the opposite effect. It isolated them from the rest of the student body and made it more difficult for them to make friends. As most of the boys struggled socially, they often avoided each other, spending time in their room alone and darting out to classes. During his sophomore year, Kacynski moved to Eliot House, home to the varsity crew team and residents of a more athletic and socially outgoing disposition. Again, Kacynski didn't fit in and would often pass his roommates without a word and head straight to his room. In his second year, at the age of 17, Kacynski volunteered to be a test subject in a CIA-funded study carried out by Harvard psychology professor Henry Murray. The study that would now be considered unethical focused on the effects of stress on the human psyche. Participants were to write essays about their beliefs, values, and ideals. They would then enter debates with other students who had been instructed to belittle, berate, and mock their arguments and ideas. The discussion was filmed and participants' vitals were measured. These recordings of anger and embarrassment would then be shown to the participants repeatedly. Kacynski participated in these studies once a week for 3 years. He stated it was the worst experience of my life, but maintained that he continued to participate because he wanted to prove he was resilient and couldn't be broken. Towards the end of his time at Harvard in 1962, Kacynski had withdrawn from what little friendships he'd made at the university. It is at this point that he claimed he decided he was anti-technology. After graduating from Harvard at the age of 20, Kacynski attended Michigan University in Ann Arbor, acquiring a master's in 1964 and a PhD in 1967, both in mathematics. Michigan was not his first choice. He preferred Berkeley or Chicago. He had applied to both universities and had been accepted. Michigan, however, had been the only university that offered him an annual grant and a teaching position. Kacynski didn't enjoy his time at Michigan University. He believed their standards were poor, with professors and students only doing the bare minimum with no sense of responsibility or pride in their work. Kacynski continued to be withdrawn from others, avoiding social situations where possible. Towards the end of his time at Michigan, he had become so sexually frustrated, he began to reason that he would need to have a sex change because that would be the only way he would ever be intimate with a woman. He had even made an appointment with a psychiatrist to discuss the practicalities of transitioning. As he sat in the waiting room, he became overwhelmed by feelings of embarrassment and anger towards himself. He changed his mind and spoke to the psychiatrist about something different. Following the session, he felt his rage move from him and onto the psychiatrist. He thought about killing them and suddenly felt better. Regarding this incident, Kacynski wrote in a journal, "Like a phoenix, I burst from the ashes of my despair to a glorious new hope. I thought I wanted to kill that psychiatrist because the future looked utterly empty to me. I felt I wouldn't care if I died. And so, I said to myself, why not really kill the psychiatrist and anyone else whom I hate? My very hopelessness had liberated me because I no longer cared about death. I no longer cared about consequences. And I said to myself that I really could break out of my rut in life and do things that were daring, irresponsible, or criminal." At 25, Kacynski became the youngest ever mathematics professor at the University of California, Berkeley. He remained there for 2 years. Students didn't seem too impressed by Kacynski's teaching skills. He often just read from textbooks, didn't answer any questions, and avoided contacts with students wherever possible. His published works were still considered impressive, and he was on track for tenure. Then, on June 30th, 1969, without warning, Kacynski quit his job. He moved back in with his parents, explaining that he couldn't be a maths professor because it would be helping technology progress and thus causing harm to nature and humankind. His parents were wary but outwardly supportive of his views. In his journal, Kacynski wrote about how he never intended to spend his life in academia, but instead taught at Berkeley to gain enough money to live out in the wilderness. Kacynski lived with his parents for 2 years. During that time, he and his brother had bought 1.5 acres of land out in the wilderness of Montana. The plan was for them both to build huts and live out there. Kacynski built a modest 10 by 14 foot hut. There was no electricity, running water, or heating, except for a small stove at the back of the cabin. At the beginning of 1971, Kacynski moved into the hut to live a self-sustaining life, living off the land. A few years went by, and Kacynski seemed to be as close to content as he'd ever been. He lived a semi-isolated existence dedicated to reading sociological, scientific, and philosophical works and obscure literature. He chopped wood and taught himself survival skills and plant identification. He would go on long hikes in the wilderness surrounding his hut. His parents and brother would visit now and then and would be impressed with how Kacynski had adapted to his surroundings. Around the mid-70s, Kacynski became increasingly angry as society began to encroach on the land surrounding his hut. More houses were built, the local population increased, as did the hikers and holidaymakers. Snowmobiles and motorcycles were more commonly used. Planes and helicopters started to traverse the skies. These developments needed materials, and the local sawmill was very active. Kacynski viewed all of this as a violation of the land and his desire to live outside of the system. He felt the system wasn't leaving him alone, and now he wanted to fight back. He wanted revenge. He began to break into cabins and vandalise them. He set traps and poured sand into the engine of the sawmill, shutting the whole thing down. During the 1970s, Kacynski sometimes returned to civilization to work menial jobs to gain money before returning to his hut. On one of these occasions, Kacynski moved back in with his parents for close to a year and got a job at a factory that his father and brother worked at. He even started to date a woman who was also working at the factory. They went on a few dates before the woman decided she just wanted to be friends. This rejection enraged Kacynski, and he began to post degrading limericks about the woman around the workplace. His brother, a supervisor at the time, warned him to stop, otherwise he would have to fire him, but Kacynski continued. After he was fired, he waited in the woman's car with the intention to mutilate her, but decided it was not worth the consequences. After failing at having a romantic relationship and being fired by his younger brother, Kacynski returned to his hut in his once so peaceful wilderness. In isolation, Kacynski grew increasingly resentful and enraged, and it was at this point that he started to learn how to make a bomb. In May 1978, he targeted Buckley Crist with his first mail bomb. He was a professor at Northwestern University. A package bearing Crist's details as a return sender was found in the parking lot and brought to Crist. Crist knew he had not sent the package and so informed security. Terry Marker responded to the call and opened the package, triggering the bomb, which went off but caused only minor injuries. Kacynski would send a further 3 more bombs, one a year later to Northwestern University again, and then 2 more targeting airlines, one in the cargo hold of an American Airlines Flight 444 from Chicago to Washington, D.C., and the other was sent direct to Percy Wood, the president of United Airlines, in June 1980. Luckily, the bombs used in these attacks were rudimental and weak, so victims received superficial cuts and burns and suffered minor smoke inhalation. Authorities were able to connect these 3 bombs because the initials FC had been engraved or painted near the explosions. They were unsure what FC meant, but it would become a signature that the bomber would use in most of his bombs. Following the 3rd bomb that was in the cargo hold of a plane, the FBI became involved. The FBI gave the investigation the code name Unabomber. This was because the initial bombings targeted universities and airlines. The media picked up on this codename and began to refer to the anonymous bomber as the Unabomber. The Unabomber consistently carried out attacks ranging from 1 to 4 times a year until 1987. In the same way serial killers hone their methods of killing with each kill, Kacynski honed his bomb-making skills with each bomb. Each bomb would be more sophisticated and deadly than its predecessor. The targets of the bombs during this time were mainly universities, including the ones Kacynski had attended, Berkeley and Michigan. His bombing took the life of his first victim in 1985. 38-year-old Hugh Scruton was a computer store owner in Sacramento, California. He had noticed a paper bag placed by the dumpster located at the back of his store. When he picked it up, it exploded, claiming his life. Scruton had been a student at Berkeley at the same time Kacynski had taught there. In response to his first murder, Kacynski expressed pleasure in his encrypted journal. Kacynski wrote, "Excellent, humane way of eliminating somebody. He probably never felt a thing." In 1978, the Unabomber struck again. The target was another computer store owner named Gary Wright in Salt Lake City, Utah. The bomb had been left in a parking lot outside of Wright's computer store. It had looked like a piece of scrap lumber, but when he picked it up, it exploded, sending 200 bits of shrapnel into his body. He was severely injured but survived. A woman had remembered making eye contact with a suspicious man earlier on in the day. He had a moustache and was wearing aviation glasses with his hood up. A composite sketch was made from this sighting, which was widely publicised. 6 years followed with no further attacks from the Unabomber. At this point, the authorities, the FBI included, were no closer to figuring out who the Unabomber was. All they had was a hooded figure wearing big sunglasses as a composite sketch. Some attempts at profiling that relied on very few traces of evidence left over from the bombs. He used wood a lot in his bombs, so nature is probably important to him. He seems at home in universities, so he's probably educated. The locations he bombed are perhaps close to places he lived in at some point. To make things more difficult, the Unabomber would put fake clues into his bombs to throw them off, such as hair he collected from a restroom or sentences that didn't really mean anything. He never left any fingerprints or DNA. The parts he used for his bombs were easily obtainable and practically untraceable. Kacynski travelled alone and spoke to almost no one. He used public transport with tickets he paid for in cash, travelling hundreds of miles to plant or mail bombs. He was practically a ghost. So when he went quiet for 6 years, people thought that maybe he felt he had proven his point and had stopped permanently. With no further bombs or leads, the case goes cold and the Unabomber task force disbands. Unfortunately, in June 1993, the Unabomber returned with ferocity by sending 2 mail bombs in 1 week. One to the home of Charles Epstein, a geneticist at California University, San Francisco. He lost 3 fingers and damaged both eardrums, resulting in partial hearing loss. The other is sent to the office of David Glettner, a computer scientist at Yale University who nearly bled to death, lost vision in his right eye and use of his right hand, not to mention the severe burns and damage from the shrapnel following the explosion that engulfed his office in flames. The Unabomber task force was reinstated in response to these 2 bombings. The task force grew to more than 150 full-time investigators, analysts, and forensic agents. The fear reignited in American citizens now that the Unabomber had returned, this time causing even more damage, resulted in tens of thousands of calls and leads to the Unabomber tip line. This still does not net the task force any meaningful suspects. Kacynski mails a bomb to the New Jersey home of an advertising executive, Thomas Mosser. Mosser had been part of an advertising campaign for Exxon to repair their public image following an oil spill they were responsible for. On December 10th, 1994, Mosser opened the package in his kitchen and the bomb killed him instantly. His wife and daughter were luckily far enough away not to be injured. In April 1995, the Unabomber sent a letter to the New York Times. It explained that FC stood for Freedom Club, the name of their organisation. It also stressed that the Unabomber is not a lone crazy person, but a group of like-minded eco-anarchists working together to destroy the system. It claimed responsibility for the murder of Mosser, refers to the FBI as a joke, and concludes with an offer. If the newspaper published a long article about their ideas, they would stop the bombs in return. He explained that he would send the document to be published in due course. The same month, on the 24th of April 1995, another mail bomb is set off, this time killing timber industry lobbyist Gilbert Murray in Sacramento. The Unabomber claims his 3rd victim. In June, as promised, the New York Times and the Washington Post receive a 35,000-word manifesto and inform the FBI. After much consideration and discussion, the FBI and the Department of Justice advised the papers to agree to the Unabomber's offer. The FBI hoped that someone would read the document and would be able to identify who the author was based on the topic and writing style used. The Times and Washington Post printed the Unabomber's manifesto entitled Industrial Society and Its Future. It is distributed online and published as an 8-page supplement with the September 19th newspaper. The manifesto argues that the system is created in a way that enslaves man and destroys the natural world. It argues that the advancements of technology will only lead to the destruction of the world and humankind, so it needs to be destroyed. While it argued for the system's collapse, it did not provide an alternative. Instead, it states, "We have no intention about the feasibility of creating a new, ideal form of society. Our goal is only to destroy the existing form of society." The Unabomber goes on to justify his murderous campaign by saying it got our message to the public with some chance of making a lasting impression. Kacynski had cut contact with his parents by the mid-80s, and then with his brother around the start of the 90s. He wasn't happy that David had gotten married and felt that he had become a willing part of the system. Despite no longer being in contact with his brother, upon reading the manifesto online, David and his wife became concerned that his brother was the Unabomber because the language was reminiscent of letters Kacynski had once written to David. The couple hire an investigator to look into the case with the view of seeing if Ted Kaczynski could be the Unabomber. David hoped the findings would absolve his brother, but the investigator only found evidence to the contrary. Not wanting to betray his brother, but also knowing he couldn't live with the guilt if someone else died, David instructs the investigator to contact the FBI and hand over the information they had collected. Weeks go by with no contact from the FBI. The FBI had been overwhelmed by leads, so it took 3 weeks for the task force to check the information. When they do, they are convinced that Ted Kaczynski was the manifesto's author and very likely the Unabomber. They organise a tactical arrest of Ted Kaczynski. They're aware that he has weapons and most likely explosives in his hut. SWAT teams surround the hut out of sight. All they can do is wait. There's no line of sight into the cabin. On April the 3rd, 1996, 3 agents dressed in attire befitting of hikers call out to the hut and begin to walk towards it slowly. Kacynski opens the door. The 3 agents walk towards the door, making up an explanation of who they are. Once they are close enough, they apprehend a dishevelled and unsuspecting Kacynski. The news broadcasts that the Unabomber has been caught after family members turn him in, much to the disappointment of David, who'd been promised that his involvement would be kept confidential by the FBI. Kacynski's hut was a treasure trove of evidence. There was the typewriter he used to write the manifesto and various books about bomb building and eco-terrorism. They also found bomb components and 40,000 handwritten journal pages, including an encrypted journal that documented and provided detailed accounts of each of the Unabomber attacks. They even found the hoodie and glasses synonymous with the Unabomber. The article of most concern was the bomb they found that was packaged and ready to be mailed. Kacynski is charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. Understanding that the prosecution was likely to seek the death penalty, Kacynski's defense attorney began to ready their insanity defense. They had arranged for his hut to be recovered and used to support their argument in court, reasoning that no sane person would choose to spend over 20 years in such a small, rudimental structure, especially during the harsh Montana winters. When Kacynski learned that his attorney planned to claim he was insane, Kacynski moved to have them fired and for him to represent himself. Kacynski knew that if people thought he was insane, it meant his ideas expressed in his manifesto would be ignored and viewed as nothing more than the ramblings of a crazy person. As Kacynski was not qualified to represent himself, his request was denied by the court. Following this, Kacynski tried to kill himself, but this attempt was unsuccessful. Dr. Sally Johnson, the prosecution's psychological expert, spoke with Kacynski for 22 hours. She concluded that while Kacynski was fit to stand trial, his obsession with his perceived persecution by society and his beliefs regarding technology were delusional and consistent with a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. This diagnosis is consistent with the average onset age of schizophrenia, given that these delusions started in his early to mid-20s. The prosecution believed they would be unlikely to secure a death penalty at trial, given the diagnosis from Dr. Johnson and the insanity plea defense Kacynski's attorneys would be arguing. As a result, the state offered a plea deal. If Kacynski pleaded guilty, he would avoid the death penalty and the declaration of insanity. Kacynski accepted this deal, and on January the 22nd, 1998, he pleaded guilty to 13 charges, including 3 charges of first-degree murder. He is given 8 life sentences without the possibility of parole. He's incarcerated at the ADX Florence, a supermax prison in Colorado, where he spent most of his sentence until he was moved to a federal medical center in December 2021 as a result of having late-stage cancer. He died pretty recently. He died on June the 10th, 2023. It is believed that this death was a suicide. That's all I have for this one. I'm still unsure whether Kacynski was a misunderstood genius or mentally unwell. I found myself agreeing with a lot of what he'd written, not the bits about the murdering people and destroying the system. Still, I agree that technology and its advancements are damaging the natural world and affecting humankind in a negative way, physically, mentally, spiritually. I think it's always wise to be wary of any ideologies that promote destruction without giving guidance on what comes next, like what will replace the thing that we've destroyed. I also believe that technology can be used to better society if we utilise it wisely and understand that we have a responsibility to protect the natural world. Maybe Kacynski was both, a genius and suffering from mental illness. Maybe if he'd been given help when he was in his early 20s, things would have shook out a bit more positively. Anyway, I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. If you got something out of this episode, please consider giving it a like. If you want to see more episodes, make sure you click the subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss anything. But that's it for now. I'll catch you in the next one.